The brand Omega and the word forgotten are rarely used in the same sentence given Omega's many contributions to the world of watchmaking. Yet when it comes to the watch I am wearing on my wrist right now, it certainly does apply. And that watch is the OMEGA Globemaster. And in this video, I'm going to review this piece and share why I think it's probably their most underrated watch and why I ultimately decided to buy one. Let's jump in. And before we jump into this video, if you want some of the best watch photography to look at on a day-to-day basis, I'd follow me along on Instagram as well as Twitter. Yes, Twitter, been posting a lot there. Probably have the most interacted with Twitter account in watches. So definitely check us out on both of those platforms. Some of the best photography, I'd put it up against anybody else that's taking photos of watches, wide just array of different watches that we're covering there. It's a great way to stay also in the loop about future content. So follow us both of these places and also follow along on Facebook if you want to stay completely in the loop. Great content also going out there. Check it out. Links will be in the description down below. So despite the name of this watch casually being called the Globemaster, it's important to note it falls underneath the Constellation collection and is more formally known as the Constellation Globemaster. This distinction is important because in order to appreciate this watch fully, you must first understand the great lineage it descends from. The Constellation family of watches is one of the 4 core pillars of Omega. That also includes the DeVille, Seamaster, and of course, the Speedmaster. In 1948, Omega released a limited model known as their Centenary Edition, a watch that celebrated 100 years for the brand while also being their first automatic chronometer wristwatch. Given its limited production, there was a desire amongst Omega to develop a collection that could honor their chronometric pursuits on a more ongoing basis. And in 1952, they created their vehicle to do it, the Omega Constellation. The Constellation was inextricably linked to Omega's pursuits in fine timekeeping, both the movements they house within and with their standard medallion caseback with 8 stars, serving as a small nod to their wins in observatory chronometer trials throughout the first half of the 20th century. In many ways, an indirect precursor to what would later come with tests like COSC as an example. This medallion on the caseback, along with its trademark star at 6 o'clock, became key identifiers. Yet throughout the 1950s and 60s, we also saw 2 other design contributions that would come to also define the collection. One is pipe hand dials, referring to the raised central portion of the dial surface and recess-shaped area at its periphery, resembling, well, the reverse side of a pipe hand. Secondly, the creation of the C-case brought forth some of their finely faceted fluted bezels. The 1980s ushered in the next era where the Manhattan case was introduced, becoming the new direction of the Constellation for the following decades, being easily identified by its griff claws on the opposing sides of the case. Despite its many proponents, the Manhattan design certainly deviated from the original form, leaving many vintage Constellation lovers, including myself, waiting for a model that would combine their modern specs with mid-20th century design elements. And in 2015, we finally got it with the Omega Constellation Globemaster. The Globemaster certainly stirred up some conversation at the time of its release, given its versatile looks and new direction. However, most notably, it unveiled the first METAS-certified movement ever produced by the brand. But this backstory only begins to really set the stage on why this watch is special, so let's actually dive into the specifics of my blue dial version that I have on my wrist here, and then close out with some of my final thoughts about what I ultimately think of this piece. The Omega Globemaster on wrist measures in with a dimension set of 39 millimeters in diameter, a thickness of 12.5 millimeters, and a lug-to-lug of 46 millimeters. On paper, this watch might appear to wear smaller than advertised given its reasonable dimensions across the board. However, the 3-link style bracelet greatly impacts the end equation. This bracelet is not like any other in the Omega catalog, offering longer rectangular center links with smaller round outer links that are more rigid in their ability to articulate compared to others, a point that makes the watch appear larger when putting on wrist, specifically from the top to the bottom length, as the hypothetical lug-to-lug at the end of the end link is closer to 52 millimeters. But this is also not an accurate demonstration of wear either, as I would say splitting the difference is a closer representation. This considered, this was easily my most worn watch last year, wearing like a 40 millimeter on wrist with the bracelet, while wearing much more true to size when pairing it with a leather strap, for example. Jumping back to the bracelet, it features screwed in links sized closer to half links, which is good considering that this utilizes a butterfly push button clasp clasp with no micro adjustment, so sizing might not be the easiest for some. I thankfully didn't have too much trouble, but this is one area that I would say is one of the biggest cons affiliated with the otherwise phenomenal watch that we have here. Now the bracelet and central case is entirely brushed, helping to hide scratches to a much better degree than something like the Aquaterra that is known for its many polished elements. A win for me as an owner because I have not babied this thing to say the least. Along the case sides, we have more brushing with a hairline bevel casting along its sides, splitting up the uniform surfaces. At 3 is a fluted crown executed in push-pull variety, working with the case back and achieving a more than adequate 100 meters of water resistance. Perhaps the most eye-catching element though of this piece serves as both one of the best tributes to the past while housing one of its greatest secrets, the fluted bezel encircling the sapphire crystal. Now, as mentioned, this fluted bezel style strongly emulates the former C-case examples from decades ago. However, unlike those vintage examples, this one is made of tungsten carbide. This material is rarely ever chosen for wristwatches, more often for the edges of drills and screws or piercing projectiles. The reason, despite not being the easiest material to work with, it's known for being incredibly hard and robust, ranking as a 9 on the Mohs hardness scale, only a level behind diamond, and lands over 2,000 Vickers on the hardness scale. For context, untreated stainless steel is around 150 to 200 Vickers. In addition to its upside of not scratching, the bezel looks the part as well, reflecting with an entrancing nature when moving underneath the light. This idea continues with the dial here coming with a sunburst blue dial that has a mild sheen that plays with the light beautifully, in large part due to its 3-dimensional pipe hand dial. It is important to note that there are a couple different dial variations to choose from here, with the common alternative being the silver dial. Seated within the recessed periphery is a white minute track with applied superluminova filled indices marking the every 5 minutes, matching the baton style handset at center, shining adequate enough for some low light legibility. An applied Omega logo sits at 12 above the Globemaster cursive script. At 6, the color matched date with a step perimeter sits underneath the raised star and printed text referencing the master chronometer ticking away inside. When it comes to setting the standard for movements under $10,000, Omega certainly deserves rightful mention. Combining the idea of Dr. George Daniels' coaxial escapement with lovely machine finish calibers, Omega has planted their proverbial flag in this watchmaking domain through the creation of their master chronometer certification that was unveiled in 2015, with the Globemaster serving as the vehicle to bring this to the masses. Given the impetus for the constellation's genesis was the concept of upholding the principles of chronometry, there's probably no surprise on the choice that Omega decided here to do the job. At the time Omega started this project, the standard for accuracy in Swiss watches was from COSC, an accuracy standard for movements that has calibers undergo a variety of tests and quotes movements to achieve -4 to +6 seconds a day in accuracy. The Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology, in collaboration with Omega, developed the METAS Master Chronometer Certification, which I can't get into all the details and elements in this video, but simply put, it requires not just the movement, but further a fully cased up watch to undergo 8 stringent tests against water resistance, magnetism, power reserve, and accuracy testing, just to name a few. With the specific accepted accuracy being quoted at 0 to +5 seconds a day here, this movement testing standard has become widely respected and gives Omega a huge point of differentiation amongst the competition in the busy price range. The movement specifically housed within the Globemaster is the automatic coaxial 8900. Apart from its master chronometer certification, it employs a few key features that help elevate it in its proposition while also being useful for the everyday user. First, when pulling the crown to the second position, the 8900 offers bidirectional movement of the hour hand in lieu of a quick set date, which I personally prefer as it doesn't take much more time to set the date and makes the Globemaster one of the best travel watches in my collection. It makes changing the hour without stopping the balance an absolute breeze. In addition, this movement has 2 barrels instead of 1 that you'll find in some of the 8800 calibers that finds its way in many of the more entry-level options from the brand. This additional barrel offers 5 hours of power reserve while also improving the gradual distribution of energy to the escapement over the duration of the reserve as a result of 2 power sources. The balance is of a free-sprung architecture, utilizes a silicon hairspring while achieving a resistance up to 15,000 Gauss, a standard of these METAS certifications. When testing this watch at 5 different positions, the movement was running at +1 to +3 seconds a day, staying true to its quoted range. And to conclude, the 8900 movement operates at an unconventional but conventional for the coaxial beat rate of 3.5 Hertz or 25,200 vibrations per hour, while featuring hacking seconds when pulling the crown to the farthest position. But now for some closing thoughts on the Globemaster. So in the past 12 months, this has probably been the most worn watch in my collection. And I will just say this, I'm a little biased about the Constellation family because vintage Constellations were my gateway into loving vintage watches. And that still remains true. I love the DNA and style of those watches. And this watch represents many of those same ideas in a modern package. But let's talk about some of the cons first, and then we'll move to the pros and ultimately why I think this is one of the most underrated watches that Omega makes, point blank. Now, the bracelet is probably the number one thing people are gonna bring up. Now, both in its wear and making it appear larger on wrist, and then also just from the micro adjustment standpoint. I did not have a perfect ability to size this up the first time. It took a little bit of working with to get it at least workable for me, but that is a big challenge. If you can't size the bracelet up perfectly to your wrist, that is going to, when you're spending thousands of dollars, be a challenge for many people out there. You don't want to necessarily have to put it on a strap if you don't want to. So that's a big thing. And then also with just how the bracelet is a tad more stiff and it's heavier too, I like the design of it. It does cause the watch to wear a little bit larger. Still, even for my wrist size, I think it looks great. I do think some of the conversation about that theoretical lug to lug, it's not really accurate. And the only other thing I will say from a cons perspective, and it's not really even a con, it's just the fact that why it's overlooked, is because there are other watches that are more attainable from Omega that offer maybe a similar type of idea. So you say you look at some of the Aquaterras and saving a little bit of money in the process. But now that lets us transition into the pros here, because I do think, for my own personal taste, that this is probably one of their best watches that they produce under $10,000 with 3 hands outside of the sports watch category, the diver categories especially, period. Now, I think this is one of the more interesting sleeper options from Omega. When you look at this watch, you think you have it figured out, but with the tungsten bezel and that material, plus the movement, the history involved with the Constellation, I just think it's more interesting than what a lot of people maybe realize. You see this fluted bezel, you're like, all right, I understand the idea here, but there's just so much more to it than that. Understanding the history, the METAS certified movement, and this being the flagship product that could push that idea forward. Then you look at the Constellation as being this fixture within the collection. You look at the Speedmaster, this predates it by 5 years in existence. Railmaster, same thing. Only 4 years after the Seamaster, and the Seamaster, when it was released in 1948, is not the Seamaster that we know today by any means. So in many ways, this is one of the more historically important collections that Omega has, and I say this has the most reverence to the past and the original origins of that collection compared to almost anything else that they make, or at least it's right there with a lot of other things outside of maybe the Speedmaster. The 8900 movement is both in looks, finish, and spec class leading. I think it's absolutely fantastic. The bidirectional hour hand is amazing when you're traveling. This watch is crazy versatile as well. I think it almost emulates a lot of the same looks, at least when you have it on wrist, like the integrated sports trend, but it's not that by any means. 100 meters of water resistance. It has a more dressy appearance, but it's not too dressy. I think you could wear this every single day. It looks great with a t-shirt. It looks great with a suit. And there's not many watches out there that can do it as well as this one. So simply put, I don't think there's a better watch for me within Omega's collection under $10,000 that combines spec, history, my own personal taste, and just something that I think more people should take a look at. The fact that not enough people look at this watch is the reason why I almost want to champion it even more. I'm like, guys, we're missing something great here. The Globemaster is just a fantastic, phenomenal watch, and a watch that honestly shouldn't be underrated at all. And it should be one that maybe you should take a closer look at. But all right, guys, that's my take on the OMEGA Globemaster. As you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about this watch. I am a big fan of the Constellation family, and I think this is one of Omega's best currently in their contemporary collection that I don't think enough people consider. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that as well. Definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.